Awesome. So, first question of tonight, Ernesto, I'm blown away by your track record of founding and scaling incredibly successful businesses across a range of industries. And now you're even, you're driving great impact through your bold investment approach in cause-driven consumer products. Can you please speak to what your journey has been like as an entrepreneur in VC and what inspired you to take this wonderful path?
So I think the first thing I'd say to that is that no one is ever going to give you permission to be an entrepreneur. No one is ever going to tell you, here you go, you've got the diploma, you're now allowed to go and disrupt the world, and you're allowed to go and build something of your own. So I guess for me, the journey began with curiosity in the particular instance, right at the birth of the internet, of how you could potentially use the technology that was the emerging web to think of the music industry in a different way, of connecting consumers, audiences, and musicians differently, of learning about audiences and helping the music industry understand how best to segment its offering better. All of these things that I envisaged. So I guess, as we speak about the journey, how you become an entrepreneur, and then ultimately I'm going to talk about how you become an investor. First and foremost, it begins with being curious about how you do something differently, not accepting the status quo and being driven by trying to bring about change. And it's taking the courage from knowing that nobody's ever going to tell you that you're allowed to do so, or that you're now ready to do so. So you just have to take courage to step forward on the back of your curiosity. And it's really as a result of having, and in fact, I've created a dozen ventures in the last 20 years, not just 5, but it's as a result of having created all of these ventures and been on the side of the table of raising money and dealing with investors and financiers that I just found the conventional model of corporate capital and venture capital to be sorely lacking. And I was forever struck by the perennial short-termism and lack of aligned interests and incentives and the square root of zero value added at board level that I had. As a founder, you are the flag carrier and the standard bearer, and you're driven by belief and optimism, but deep down you're also insecure because you have no idea how you're going to go about doing what you're going to do. And what you want is to have partners that are at the table with you at board level, who have empathy with the entrepreneurial process, and who can provide wisdom and guidance and clarity at times of doubt and darkness. And very few do. Very few have that, because very few have ever created ventures on their own and been through that journey themselves. So it's as a result of having gone through all these ventures that I have, succeeded and failed in equal measure, that I thought there must be a better way of doing it. And that's how I then flipped over to the other side and created the Craftery 3 years ago. And it's a 375 million investment house. And all we do is back cause-driven challenger brands and consumer goods that are out to make the world and planet and society a better place.
Wow, that's awesome. And I really love the fact that you spoke to curiosity. I can definitely attest to curiosity within our founders network. All of them are really committed to exploring their industries, the problems that they're looking to solve. So yeah, that was really inspiring. So I'm really curious about your first business, People Sound, which you launched all the way back in 1999. And your first business, you grew it into Europe's largest online music business by user count. In a matter of 12 months, you basically created the company from scratch and made 100 hires. So what were the learnings that came out of that first time founding, and how did this inform your path after the exit, for the next 20 years?
So many learnings. So the first learning that I'd say is, when you're a first time founder, there's often the temptation to believe that this is your one shot at being an entrepreneur. And you tend to guard it jealously, and you don't tell anybody about it because you think, oh, if I'm going to tell somebody my idea, then they're going to steal my idea from me. The mark of the entrepreneurial novice is the NDA. Entrepreneurial novices are forever waving around NDAs because they think that the uniqueness lies in the idea. The truth of the matter is that whatever idea you might have come up with, whatever inefficiency you might have seen in a market, whatever opportunity you see, believe me, hundreds of others have seen it before you. And the true distinction between success and failure is not the purity of your idea, it's the quality of execution. NDAs are worth nothing, and being secretive is meaningless. The best thing that you can do as an entrepreneur founder, first-time founder, is to have the courage to bring others with you on the journey. The more you bring others into the tent with you, the more you strengthen your bench with extraordinary talent around you, and the more you're able to listen to the advice that others give you, the better off you are. So, first lesson learned is It's not going to be your only ride at the rodeo. You're going to have many opportunities of creating ventures, regardless of whether your first one succeeds or fails, whether it's, billion-dollar unicorn or a complete wipeout. It doesn't matter. If you've developed a muscle set of being entrepreneurial, of seeing opportunity where others only see challenges, and taking courage and going out and going after your vision, you will be given opportunity time and time again. And the best thing that you can do is bring others into the tent with you rather than trying to guard it jealously and secretly. The other key learning that I would say I took away from at that time really has to do with capital structure. The early days when I did this, the first days of the internet, the idea was that you try to minimize dilution and you try to drive up as high as you could the valuation of your venture so that you would keep the most money that you can for yourself and the highest share that you could for yourself. And that's a big mistake. Best thing that you can do is to raise plenty of money, not worry about valuation, because actually the higher you drive the valuation, the bigger the exit that you need to deliver ultimately. And that means the thinner the air gets up there. And if you are, cautious and sensible about taking the right amount of money onto your cap table so that you can have a good go at trying to execute your idea and have plenty of optionality in terms of what exits might look like, the better off you'll be. And the last learning I'd say from the first venture is the best thing that you can do is surround yourself, especially if you're young, with plenty of operational talent around you. Because like I said, it's very rare that the idea or the concept of a venture is what's going to lead you to success. It all has to do with execution. And there is no two ways around it. Execution comes from the skill of experience. There's this very strange contradiction where you can only be an entrepreneur if you are optimistic and imprecise. You have to be optimistic because you need to see opportunity where all others only see challenge and problem. And by definition, the consequence of being optimistic is that you are irreverent. You reject sort of an uninformed overconfidence, the standards and norms of the category that you're trying to disrupt, and you reject out of hand operational received wisdom or ways of working. And that's good because you need to have that optimistic irreverence if you're going to create something to begin with, right? If you would believe the 999 out of 1,000 people who tell you that it can't be done or it's already been done or it doesn't work, you'd never set out on your journey. But you need to find the right balance between being optimistic and irreverent and recognizing that there are skills that you don't have. And those skills will tend to be around operations. And the second thing, of course, and the required ingredient for being a successful entrepreneur is to be imprecise, because you'd never set out on your journey. And if you required knowing exactly how you're going to get to your destination before you take the first step, because of course the truth is you have no idea how you're going to get to your destination. You've got a vague vision of what you're trying to achieve, and what you need to do is have the optimism and the imprecision and confidence of saying, I'll figure it out as I go along. But again, the flip side of that imprecision can be not valuing quality of execution and operational experience sufficiently. So surround yourself with people who are operationally strong and separate rejecting norms of status quo, which you have to reject if you're going to be a disruptive entrepreneur. It's a different thing from rejecting operational skill and experience. And the best thing that you can do is mold operational skill and experience in a team onto disrupting the status quo.
That's brilliant advice, super, super helpful. And I think you've definitely done that. You've definitely brought people into the tent with you. The first time founding is not going to be the only time founding, as we've seen in your career with over a dozen companies, not 5, my mistake. So really great advice. Thank you. So following PeopleSound, you moved into retail at Tesco and Dixon's, taking up senior leadership roles where you were basically responsible for thousands of employees, operational management internationally, and redesign of existing operations. Really, really curious to figure out what you learned about the retail sector and areas for innovation in that time, 2006, I believe, to 2008, 10. So which of those problem areas still exist today in 2020?
I think it's worth also just touching upon why it was that I went into retail. And the reason why I went into retail was that my second venture failed. So the first one, PeopleSound, I sold in 2001, and that was great. And then I set out on my second one, which was a retail chain, and I grew that from 0 to 100 million in revenues. We had 1,000 employees. We'd raised, tens of millions of venture capital money, and it failed. It went bankrupt. And I was 34 years old, and I thought I was finished. I thought, my God, I've landed flat on my face. I've created a venture. It's not worked. Investors have lost all of their money. 1,000 employees have lost their work. How can I ever get out of this hole again? And this is a really important lesson because I thought I was going to be unemployable and unbackable. And I went into a self-imposed purgatory where I took on, an operational role because I thought that's the only thing I could do. And hence I took on an operational role at Tesco, where I slaved my way through in a corporate, doing work which was immensely valuable because it really did teach me the absolute nuts and bolts of clockwork precision operations. One thing that very few founders are comfortable with, but is an immensely strong skill to have, which I keep on using to this day. But the reason why this is an important story is that this purgatory was totally self-imposed, because there's no such thing as failing and being done with. And subsequent to the venture that failed, I went on and created another 10 ventures. I sold a company to Twitter, I sold a company to Snapchat, I sold a company to Intel. I became CMO of one of the world's biggest media groups, and I've created a 375 million investment fund now. So the point being, very often we're held back in what we do as entrepreneurs because we're worried that we might fail. We're worried that the consequence of a misstep would be irreparable damage to your career, and hence we don't take risks. And the truth of the matter is that the world doesn't care if you've fallen flat on your face. You just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you keep going. And none of the people that I spoke with at the time truly thought that my career was over, that I was unbackable. On the contrary, the experience that I gained from the venture that failed was probably even more valuable than all the experiences that I gained from the ventures that succeeded. And the one message that I would give back to all of you is never be afraid of failing, because actually the world doesn't care if you failed or not. And if anything, you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, try again, and succeed even better. Failing is part of being an entrepreneur. Don't be scared of it. It will not affect your career unless you've committed fraud or been grossly negligent. It's just part of setting you aside from the thousands out there who are too scared and won't take risks and only see problems rather than opportunities. It needs to be part of your DNA to accept the risk that you might fail, and that is absolutely fine if you do. It won't be your last dance and it won't be your last gig.
Great. That's really interesting. So as a slight detour from the question, really happy to talk about this. At what point did you find that resilience? At what point did you brush the dust off and go back into founding, away from corporate? Like, when did you begin to realize that failure was an asset and you kind of changed your mindset?
It took much too long. The honest truth is that it took much too long. I spent 2 years thinking that, kind of a life of corporate mediocrity was all that was left for me to feed my family and to, save my pension pot. And it was 2 years in that I met my co-founder partner, and worked together since, Elio, with whom I co-founded the Craftery. And he had just been appointed as chief executive of EMI, the music major. And he was introduced to me, given the work that I'd done in PeopleSound, disrupting the music business very early on. And he saw in me exactly what was always there. He saw in me that, disruptive spirit, the bold optimism and drive around opportunity and burning desire to change the status quo. And he couldn't have cared less about the fact that I'd done a retail venture that didn't work. He wanted that guy back, the same guy who years earlier set out to disrupt the music industry. That guy never went away. And he then hired me to, bring that disruption into the music business itself. And then I was back at the races. And the only thing I would say is, look, the 2 years that I spent in corporate were immensely valuable in teaching me operational ropes. They were meaningless in terms of my career overall. And the only reason why I did it is that I was caught with self-doubt following failure, and I shouldn't have had that. So for all of you, especially if you're young, don't worry about failing. Just take it in your stride. There's always the case of Icarus, right? Icarus flies too close to the sun and then he crashes. But the one piece of the story that people forget to tell is that the other advice Icarus is told is don't fly too low because your wings will get wet and you will drown.
Wow, that was really, really powerful. So yeah, we can kind of leave the corporate stuff behind, talk about founding, much more interesting as well. So following that, following the music business, you started to chair Hypersurfaces AI, which brings contextual sentience to passive objects and devices, in addition to Aerial AI, which enables AR, immersive gaming, and experiential retail all on a mobile device. So can you tell us a little more about these companies? How did you get into them? And what do you see as being the future of the space, immersive consumer experiences on mobile devices?
Yeah, so really what I've majored on in the last, half dozen years or so has been disruptive tech, and mostly around artificial intelligence. So I've got, I think, 5 ventures under my belt there. One which you haven't mentioned, which was Fabula, which was acquired by Twitter in 2019, used AI to detect disinformation or fake news on social media by looking at the propagation patterns. So that was one application of AI. But then the ones that you've grouped together there are the ones that are trying to deliver a different level of experience in consumer electronics and mobile devices, right? So both Hypersurfaces, which turns any everyday object into a sentient object that understands what's happening in its environment and context, and Aerial, which was about delivering pixel accurate, real-time human recognition and reconstruction on mobile, hence enabling futuristic stuff like holographic teleportation and seamless virtual reality augmentation, all these sorts of things that would be unthinkable and do so in real time on your mobile device. They all have to do with the journey that mobile devices are on. And this is a really, really hot area of development. And if you're thinking of doing disruptive work in tech, then this is definitely a vector that I would recommend you look into, because there's limitless opportunity around that. When you think about what mobile devices do and have done in the history of mobile devices, it was really, level after level and phase after phase about adding new levels of data flows onto them. So initially it was just telephony, and then it was telephony and images, and then it was about the quantified self, about your GPS positioning and accelerometers and gyroscopes and all of these sorts of things. And with all of these additional sensors that come on board, the device becomes ever richer in data, but continues to be poor in information. And the next paradigm of development for mobile devices, all of them, so that's phones and smart speakers and laptops and quantified self and everything, is not about adding more data sources, but adding sentience, understanding, intelligence of what is happening around them. And when you're thinking about the case of hypersurfaces, if your mobile phone can understand that you're right now in the kitchen and that you're preparing dinner, it can then automatically fire a notification to your partner to say dinner's ready in 20 minutes. Or if your device knows that you're in the cinema, you're not in the queue for the popcorn, but you're actually in the cinema and the movie's started, it can know automatically to mute the notifications for you so you don't interrupt anybody. So the idea is that when devices are capable of adapting to the user by understanding the context that the user is in, you've unlocked the next level of seamless merging of human and interface and device. And that's what all of those ventures are about. Like I said, Aerial AI, which was acquired by Snap 6 months ago, is all about delivering seamless human integration into virtual reality and augmented reality. And the idea is that you'll be able to hold up your mobile phone and I can see you there, and it recognizes you and it reconstructs you in 3 dimensions and fires a virtual version of you to the other side of the globe, and you can have like a holographic conversation just on the back of your mobile phone. That's where I think a lot of very interesting developments are coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Super, super interesting. We actually have a bunch of founders in our audience at the minute who are working on mobile apps. So I'm sure that they'll have a lot of questions about that to ask you as well at the end of the session. I figured that we would move on to talking about your advice and your guidance for founders, given that that's who a lot of the audience are. I'm really interested by how you raised over $400 million to date across all of your businesses. What is your top tip to early stage founders currently looking to raise either their first or second round, so not quite as mature as the companies that you've helmed, but what worked for your timing and what underpinned your strategy for fundraising?
I think the lessons are true regardless of whether it's your first $50,000 of angel money that you're raising or $50 million for your Series B. It's the same time and again. I think the DNA of a great founder combines a number of qualities, which I've mentioned already before, which has to do with being optimistic and imprecise. You really do have to have optimism. You have to be driven by boundless opportunity. You need to have a fire in your belly that you're just going to change the world or change a category or grab an opportunity that others have just not seen and you see it very clearly, and you have to have that. And as an investor, I clearly look for that optimism in the founders that I back. And you need to have that imprecision, that belief that you will figure it out. That imprecision needs to be backed up by very strong operational skills. It's one thing to be imprecise and clueless, and the other one is to be imprecise but have all of the skills on your team and on your front bench to make sure that you will find a way to do so. And if you're young and you don't have those skills yourself, make sure that you surround yourself with others in your founding team who do have those skills. But the third quality, which I haven't spoken about so far, which is incredibly important, is that you have to be a master storyteller. At the end of the day, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you are first and foremost a storyteller. And it's your ability to tell in an infectious manner that inspires others to quit their jobs and work with you, or part with their funds and back you, or sign on the dotted line and trade with you. That suspension of disbelief from I promise you that it will be there and it is there has to do with storytelling. And your job as the founder is to be the master storyteller. Now, founders who can speak with incredible eloquence and can take complex problems and break them down into simple bite-sized chunks that your audience can understand, who can speak compellingly and beautifully, have a huge advantage over those who might not have that gift. But one thing that I will tell you is that with the gift of being a great storyteller also comes risk and danger, because people will believe you. If you speak with confidence and authority and convincingly, people will believe you. And your responsibility is always to find the right balance between recognizing that you will not have all the answers, especially very early on, because you can't. But what you can't do is overpromise the blue moon that you'll never achieve. So you forever need to be bound by resolute, copper bottom, rock solid integrity in knowing what you can achieve and what you really definitely can't achieve.
That's a really interesting piece of advice around storytelling. And I guess that's also really integral to acquiring an extensive network of customers like you did. And I figured that's the perfect segue into our next question about how you've scaled your businesses impressively quickly. For example, with your film business, Silver Screen, you opened a network of 65 stores around the UK within 2 years of founding. So what was the story that you shared there? How did you use effective storytelling?
Well, it is really just that. Like I said, it's, not trying to, put it this way. The analogy I like to use is that when you take on a corporate job, you start with nothing, right? Somebody says to you, okay, you're good to go. Here's the title, here's a chair, and off you go. You start with nothing. And what you do is that you try to make things yours. You try to, win influence and score success and win alliances and allegiances. You're trying to make something yours from something that is, void and null. There's nothing there. When you're a founder entrepreneur, it's the exact opposite. Everything at the beginning is right in the palm of your hand. It's your idea. It's right there. It's right there. But unless you are willing to open up and let go and let others take and run with it and make it theirs, it will never scale. It will never grow. So the success with scaling is the recognition that your job as the founder is not to retain control over everything you're doing, but it is instead being comfortable with forever letting go. And the best thing that you can do is not believe that your job is to do everybody else's job better than they can. The best thing that you can do is recognize that you will only grow like a Russian doll by hiring others around you that are bigger than you. In your job, you will have succeeded if the business outgrows you. I remember the first time it happened to me. It was at Beamly, one of my ventures, when I'd assembled an incredible team, and there was a meeting and there was a presentation, and it was clear that the team had concluded that we needed to be going in product innovation in a direction that was counter to what I thought we should be going into. My first reaction was to say, oh my God, I need to retain control. I need to regain control. These guys have gone completely off the rails. What are they talking about? And then I realized that no, on the contrary, my job was not to regain control at that point, but to recognize that I'd hired an outstanding team. I'd empowered them to take ownership and run with it and make it theirs. And through the results and labor of their very hard and impeccable work, they had reached conclusions that had evaded me intuitively previously. So your job, if you're trying to scale, is to let go. And the best way to fail at scaling is to believe that you need to keep on being in control.
That's great, because being a founder is never really going to be a one-man job. Really interesting. So surrounding yourself with a really strong team. So I'd like to talk about the Craftery for a little bit. You co-founded the Craftery in 2018 with a focus on cause-driven challenger brands in the consumer packaged goods space. Can you please share a little about why you decided to pivot to a focus on this space from previously what you were doing in immersive technologies?
So I think there are two reasons for that. One of them has to do with seeing the opportunity as ever, and I spoke about how I believe that there clearly were better ways of doing the combining of capital and venture. And, we set up the Craftery, like I said, like kind of the counter-corporate anti-VC, because we thought that there must be a better way of doing it. But it also had to do with a reflection on what personally brings me happiness and fulfillment. And this is another important point, which is so much of our lives, we forever make decisions based on what we believe is expected of us. The script that we've been handed for our lives, the script of expectations that we believe are placed on us by our family, our peers, those around us. This is what my life is supposed to be. And those choices affect everything from the subject that you study or don't study, to the university you go to or not go to the job that you take, to the partner that you marry or not marry. All of those things typically come down to what we believe is expectation. And that very rarely is a path to fulfillment, because expectations are ephemeral and they're not real. And the best thing that you can do is to take the time to reflect upon what is it that genuinely gives you happiness and fulfillment. And I combine fulfillment and happiness because if all you ever did was pursue happiness, you would never do things that are difficult. But the truth is that an awful lot of the things that give us happiness in the long term require adversity and working through adversity in the short term, growth, right? So if you take the time to think hard about what brings you happiness and fulfillment, chances are that those things have very little to do with what you believe is the script for your life. I went through that exercise and I came to realize that the things that make me immensely happy have to do with learning. I'm happiest when I don't know what I'm doing. I'm completely out of my depth and I'm presented with an entirely new challenge and problem of an industry or company that I don't understand what I'm doing. And the process of going from not understanding to understanding is one that forever makes me happy. The second one that I found makes me hugely happy is to be in the position of being a trusted mentor, to find that somebody looks to me to help guide them when they're confused, to motivate them when they're feeling slack, to encourage them when they're feeling scared. That position of being a mentor, a teacher, not in a classroom sense, but a teacher in terms of grabbing life and life's opportunities, is a position of immense privilege that brings me huge happiness. And if I combine forever learning in new situations and being in the privileged position of being a mentor, guide, consigliere or ally, then moving from being an entrepreneur to being an investor is actually the perfect segue, because what do I get to do all day long but forever be presented with completely new industries and categories that I don't understand, that I need to understand and try to figure out, and presented with companies that are doing things in new and novel ways that I hadn't thought of before. So the learning is everlasting. And in contrast to the investors that I had previously when I was younger than an entrepreneur, I've been through the wars. I've succeeded with ventures and I've failed with ventures in equal measure. And consequently, I can speak with empathy about the entrepreneurial process, and I can understand the challenges that founders go through, from being scared and lonely in moments to being, hyper enthusiastic and over optimistic in others. To be in that position of being able to speak from experience, it gives me enormous happiness. So the reason why I created the Craftery, like I said, is one, because clearly there was the opportunity to do it better, to do capital better, but also in so doing, finding that I was optimizing around my own happiness and fulfillment.
Great. That's really interesting to hear about your thought process behind that decision. And on that point you made about being a trusted mentor, I also love that the Craftery brands itself as an investment house rather than a fund, because you're looking to make long-term impact rather than solely turn a profit, which I found was really interesting. So are you able to talk a little more to what the Craftery focuses on for those in the audience who are not fully acquainted with what you're doing?
Absolutely. So the Craftery exists solely with the aim of amping, as an amplifying, cause-driven challenger brands in consumer goods. And I guess the founding idea is, we live in troubled times. The world is not in a great place. I think we all know that. So if you're trying to bring about change at scale, there are probably three ways in which you can do that. One is that you're in government and you can set policy, but okay, very few of us get to be in government. The second one is that you might have limitless means, like Bill Gates, and single-handedly vaccinate Africa or build sanitation in India. And that's amazing, but 5 people in the world get to do that. But the third, which is curious, is that you take hundreds of millions of consumers who collectively make billions of consumption choices every day. On average, 12 products that we touch and consume each and every single day of the year. And you help offer those consumers slightly better choices. So you offer them a choice that is the more sustainable alternative, or the fairer supply chain, or the more ethical approach, or the slightly better option rather than the incumbent status quo. And that is what challenger brands are. Challenger brands are trying to bring about change at scale by offering consumers a slightly better alternative. And the consequence is that in whatever category you look at, growth in that category ends up going to the challengers. So, and the consequence of that is that the norms for the category get raised and it becomes the new norm. So you can barely buy products that are packaged in plastic anymore in many categories now, not because it's been legislated for by government, but because consumers have led with their debit cards and credit cards buying products that offer a more sustainable alternative. So the craftery exists purely to work with packaged consumer goods that are cause-driven to try to make the world a better place, to try to raise the bar of standards in their category, and in so doing, raise the bar for the rest of the world. And we go after 5 broad causes, the causes that kind of affect us all in the world right now. It's either about trying to prosper sustainably, i.e. in keeping with the resources that our planet has to offer, or it's about democratizing access, making available to the many what was previously only available to the few by focusing on direct channels and value, but also just making things simple to understand and demystifying and debunking them and getting rid of gatekeepers, things like that. The third, which is very relevant, is about championing self-esteem. That's to counteract the toxic effects on the mental health of a whole generation that forever being presented with unobtainable images of body and lifestyle that social media has had on all of us. So brands that make you feel good about yourself, whatever shape your mind or body might be in. The next is about delivering good health, which is about better for you food and ingredients, plant-based alternatives to animal proteins, things like that, but also new science and learning like gut microbiome and others. If as a challenger brand, you've got any of those causes as your reason for being, then that's what we do. You know, we provide you with all the capital you ever need, but more critically, we use our expertise as brand builders and operators, because all of us are, none of us are conventional financiers, to help you scale from the initial product market fit stage, after which we come on, to being, you know, at hundreds of millions of revenue. And it's an immense privilege to be allowed to do so.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about the status of challenger brands now, because I think in previous years, there was a certain sort of misconception that maybe consumer was too small and that, you know, from tech investors, that no one consumer brand would be as large as a tech incumbent. So along the lines of that, like, what is one misconception that you think people have about the consumer sector or challenger brands or even CPG?
I mean, you know, I guess I'm schizophrenic and I wear 2 hats because I spend a chunk of my time doing tech work and tech ventures. And then I run a challenger brand consumer goods investment house. But what I would say is that, you know, arguably peak tech happened already years ago. You know, if you look at the stats, kind of peak investment in early tech from VC peaked in 2014, 2015, something like that. And the truth is that I think that in many cases, the days when 3 guys and girls in a garage could create the next Facebook or Google are probably over. You've now got, you know, we've created a perfect oligopoly of tech giants. And, you know, the bar has been raised very high for creating new end-to-end consumer businesses in tech like that. And certainly there's certain categories like financial services with fintech and other, there's still plenty of disruption to be done, but, you know, it's getting very hard in tech. And in contrast, consumer goods, which is a $3 trillion category worldwide each year, has been left largely unchallenged throughout the entire tech revolution, because all the MBAs and Harvard grads and others went and created the next Facebook and Google rather than trying to create the next Unilever. But the truth is that a lot of the reasons why the Procter & Gamble's and Unilevers and others were protected from disruptive innovation for so long no longer apply. You know, it used to be that you needed to have massive amounts of capital to build a supply chain. Well, that no longer is the case. Supply chain as a service exists in virtually any category. You can pick any product category in consumer goods that you want, and there will be third-party manufacturers who will make you whatever you want them, you know, to make for you, and you don't have to worry about manufacturing and supply initially, certainly at least. And the other thing was that it was all about physical distribution in Walmart and physical retail. And unless you had the big guns, you could never compete with Procter & Gamble. Unilever would have prime shelf facings and would forever push you out of the Walmart shelves at the first opportunity. When now an awful lot of categories, including categories you would have never imagined, would be bought direct online. And you don't need to spend money on the Super Bowl television advertising. You can do very targeted marketing digitally. And that means that the walls have come crumbling down in terms of the defensiveness of conventional packaged consumer goods and focused challenger brands who've got as their reason to provide a better alternative, are able to make great inroads. You see, the logic of consumer goods historically was the pursuit of delivering ever greater efficiency against functional requirements. So if your functional requirement is you've got a stain on your clothes, the stain needs to disappear. Or you've got, a pain in your arm, the pain needs to go away. So the conventional logic of consumer goods was stain here, stain gone, pain here, pain gone. Functional requirements. And consumer goods have been incredibly good at delivering ever greater efficiency with that, which means that you can now get, I don't know, a surface cleaner for $2 that does absolutely a perfect job of cleaning your kitchen counter, but it's bad for the environment. And by the way, it's toxic for you too. Challenger brands don't come in trying to beat Procter & Gamble at the cost efficiency of cleaning a surface. What challenger brands come in is to say, we're not going to compete on functional efficiency, we're going to compete on the consequences of consumption. So challenger brands win, not if they're trying to beat P&G at being a $1.75 surface cleaner. They beat P&G by saying, we're a surface cleaner that cleans the surface, but does so without harming the environment and without being toxic to you. And in so doing, you can probably do it for $3 or $4 rather than $1.75 because you're appealing to a completely different value set, not with all consumers, but maybe 20 or 30% of consumers. Put all of those things together, and it means that you have got trillions of dollars of disruption that you can go after. And nowadays I'm seeing more MBAs and super high potential grads going after their favorite consumer goods category and saying, I can do better than what the incumbents are offering me, than going after trying to create the next Facebook or Google.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're entering a new era where consumers are definitely more conscious about the causes they're supporting. So no better time, really, really important. So Jason has had his hand up for a while. So Jason, do you want to unmute and ask Ernesto your question?
Sure. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Melissa. So you said there are three sort of ways to change world policy, right? A lot of money and the third, consumer. And you did bring on tech a bit. I just, and this isn't utmost respect, I wanted to push back on that a tiny bit just because when I think about it too, like with consumer and tech, sort of one of those really like strong points of tech is sort of this idea of like network effects, right? Everything, this idea of your users almost somewhat the product. But with consumer, it's kind of more in the traditional, like as what you said, if Unilever is something 1.75, you're selling for 3 to 4, then basically the way you can sell your goods is because there's some sort of a macro shift in policy. But wouldn't that be more required? Like we would have to become like more environmentally conscious in some ways. And then I'd just love to hear your take on like why perhaps is tech stagnating? Like perhaps are there some ways where, in my sense at least, I do think like things like the internet or Facebook when they came about, they kind of just like elevated human consciousness in a way that was like unimaginable. And in some ways, people may think that perhaps the next thing could be like AR or VR or something like that. But part of me likes to think that there's still some way to sort of increase consciousness and like help society in ways that we can't even imagine, right? Like category defining companies in perhaps this traditional tech, but I'd love to hear your take on that. Thanks.
Plenty of questions all packed into one there, but I'll try to answer at least most of them as best I can. So the first thing is to be very clear. It's not like innovation in technology is over. Clearly it isn't. I mean, I'm involved in half a dozen tech ventures, still am, and clearly they're going to be doing fantastic work and proving disruptive. But the days when 4 of you could sit in the garage and create the next Google probably are over. In the sense that 1, Google, Facebook, and all of those are already out there. And with them come thousands of engineers and billions of dollars of capital that they will put behind any vector and technology disruption that they may have missed out on. That means that you can still create perfectly valid, a tech venture and get a $100 million exit after 2 or 3 years being acquired by one of them. But that's not the same as creating a $100 billion or $1 trillion business. I think the bar has simply been raised. Also in consumer expectation. I don't know, maybe you guys were a bit young still in those days, but the early days of Facebook and Twitter and all of those products and Google, they were terrible products. And the reason why they could get away with being terrible products is that consumers didn't know any better. Consumers didn't know any better and didn't really expect the product to have uptime of 99.9997% and be seamlessly integrated with all of your devices and have a slick interface. In those days, you could get the first version of Twitter out the door in 8 weeks of coding, and there you are, off you go. You try launching a product nowadays after 8 weeks of coding, consumers are going to laugh you all the way out of the App Store because expectations around quality of execution have gone sky high. So to be very clear, I'm not saying that innovation in tech is over. Of course it isn't over. We've got a long way to go. But the days when you could stake a claim out in the Wild West that was just a swath of completely virgin land, white space that you could just dominate and create $1 trillion business out of, I think it's much harder. It's not impossible, but it's much harder. In contrast, you've got a whole product category in consumer goods that's laid dormant, super profitable, unchallenged for way too long, and it's just ripe for disruption. And the things that you can create, unicorns, billion-dollar businesses, just by focusing on consumer goods. And you're right, you have to think very carefully about how you're disrupting consumer goods, Jason. And not every consumer is going to be cause-driven. Absolutely not. Our view at the Craftery is that 80% of consumers will continue to follow the conventional logic of consumer goods because they don't have the choices, or they don't have the awareness, or they don't have the means to go for an alternative. But 20% of a multi-trillion-dollar category is plenty enough value to go after. And the 20% of consumers who do care for a better alternative, a more convenient alternative, a fair alternative, a more sustainable alternative, will set the bar of expectations for the rest of the category. And in so doing, you have the opportunity to, for the first time, do well and do good at the same time. That's what's so exciting about consumer goods right now, which is, for so much of capitalist history, there was a trade-off between doing well and doing good. And, first you did well, and then you try to give back again by doing good. Well, if you are doing proper work in consumer goods and you're completely democratizing a category and raising the bar on sustainability or fairness of supply chains, whatever else it is, you can get out of bed in the morning and say, I'm doing well and I'm doing good at the same time. And that's exhilarating.
Thank you so much.
I can see that Andy has his hand up. Also, I'm very happy to go off record if any of you want to ask more personal questions about your startups. So just let me know if you want to do that. But yes, Andy, go ahead.
Thanks, Melissa. Ernesto, you talked a little bit about the Craftery as sort of a new approach to thinking about the CPG space in terms of I think the way you describe it is like an alternative to traditional VC. And so I was curious as to your thoughts on so one of our backers, we're a regenerative bio consumer packaged goods company, is P&G Ventures. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts on corporate venture capital as a way of addressing those concerns about CSR or some of those like sustainability issues compared to traditional VC. And then I would also love your thoughts on the sort of the rise and transition of these really big branding agencies. So like Gin Lane, which is responsible for like a lot of these big D2C companies in the last like 5 years in D2C, is now Pattern, right? They don't do branding anymore. It's all internal in-house spinouts. I'm curious as your thoughts on those two questions.
So Andy, I began the session by saying, whatever venture you're doing, don't worry, it's not your last gig. And the reason why I'm saying this is that I'm going to give you strong views. So a quick segue. One of the sayings that I borrowed from Amazon, it's not mine, is strong views loosely held, as kind of, one of the rules, one of the cultural values that we adhere to at the Craftery, and one that I try to instill in all of the ventures and brands that we collaborate with and work with and back. And everybody always hears the first half of that sentence, strong views, as in, have a view and, be willing to, sorry, it's the other way around. Everybody always has the loosely held, as in when the facts change, you change your mind. And that's such an important thing to do rather than sandbagging. But actually the truth is that the first half of that sentence is almost the harder one, which is having a strong view. Very often it's very easy in an imperfect world where it's only ever shades of gray and nuance. Nothing is ever obvious one way or another. Easiest thing to do is forever to dither and to disappear into never-ending further analysis and never actually make a decision and come to a conclusion. And the best thing that you can do to give clarity to yourself and to your team and to your organization is to simplify what is a complex situation into a simple, strong view. And then be willing to change it afterwards. So I'm going to give you a strong view. I'm going to take what is a complex situation, multifaceted and nuanced, definitely no one single answer for everything, but I'm going to give you a strong view. And the strong view is taking any kind of corporate venture capital money is the death knell of your venture. Let me be very clear about it. Corporates do not understand growth and venture. When a corporate promises you all manner of strategic value added and synergies and all sorts of doors they'll open and supply chains they'll make available, whatever else that is, that's going to disappear faster than you can say kapow after the ink is dried on your deal. Value added from strategics never shows up. It doesn't. And the reason why it doesn't is that you are, by definition, the problem to the status quo. If you've chosen to make a career in a corporate, it's because you're valuing the status quo. If you've chosen to go out as a disruptive entrepreneur, it's because you're challenging the status quo. The board of directors of the corporate might very well understand that the disruption that you're trying to champion is exactly what that corporate needs, but go 1 or 2 layers down from that, boardroom, and you will find that the rest of the organization is going to have an allergic organ reaction to everything you stand for. They're going to have an allergic organ reaction to you, your nature, your risk-taking, your daring do and optimism. Everything that you stand for is the counter to what they are. And trust you me, at every opportunity that they will, and they can, and they will fail to deliver the value that, the hallowed boardrooms promised you would be delivered. The other piece, though, is much more important. The signaling value to all other potential acquirers of a corporate taking a minority investment in you is that you're off the menu. If Procter & Gamble is invested in you in a minority, Unilever, Henkel, none of those guys are ever going to look at you. They're not going to look at you because they're going to say, either you're successful, in which case P&G is going to buy you because they know more about you than they do, or if P&G is not going to buy you, it means that P&G knows more about the problems that you're not being honest about that they don't know about, which means that if you take minority money from a corporate, chances are none of the others will even look at you. They won't even do the work to look at you. So you are dead. So my one piece of advice to you is never fall for the BS of synergy value and signaling value of, oh my God, I've got a big corporate invest in me and that means that I'm doing well. It means the death of optionality and is the dearth, forever waiting for synergies to be delivered, and they won't be delivered. So there you go. I've taken a complex situation and I've oversimplified it for the purpose of illustration.
That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting. So I can see a question from KP. So if you want to unmute, go ahead and ask.
Hey, thank you. So I had the question about, actually there are 2 questions. So what are your thoughts on a social commerce platform for fashion? And then what are your thoughts for an asset-light alternative to Amazon Marketplace rollups such as Thrasio?
Oh dear. Okay, so Thrasio, why don't we start with that one? So there are currently 2 buzzwords that you can barely walk down the street without getting hit over the head with. One of them is a SPAC, and the other one is an Amazon roll-up. So we can talk about SPACs some other time, but it's money for old rope, honestly. SPACs are deeply problematic, and that whole bubble is going to explode and then implode before you know it. But when it comes to the Thrasio model, the idea is that Amazon has intrinsic real estate value. If you are an independent Amazon reseller and you've got high review ratings and you've got the right number of reviews on there, you've effectively won over the Amazon algorithm, which means that you can almost dominate a certain product category on Amazon as an independent reseller on virtue of the value of your real estate. So what Thrasio do is that they, and 50 others since out there, including SPACs that have been raised just to do that, to concatenate buzzwords. What these guys do is that they try to buy up as many as they can of these mom and pop single resellers, and they do it for what they believe is successful arbitrage, where they'll pay 1 or 2 times revenue and it'll immediately be worth 10 times revenue once it's under the Thrasio model, just because it's a different ownership structure. So I think the observation here to say is, firstly, it goes to show how powerful Amazon is. And for anybody doing D2C e-commerce, ignoring Amazon is actually a bigger sin than ignoring Google. I mean, more than 50%, 55, 58% of all e-commerce transactions online begin with people searching in Amazon, not on Google. So if you're ignoring Amazon, you're basically leaving more than half of your potential market out on the line. And if you're successful in selling outside of Amazon, trust me, you're going to have copycats on Amazon occupy your key terms in the same way that they might squat, a URL on the web itself. So you have to have an Amazon solution. And all of this model just shows how, if you manage to crack Amazon, that's a very powerful proposition. So there you go. We thought the internet was going to create perfect competition. Actually, what we did was create perfect monopolies, or cozy oligopolies at best. Well, in the case of e-commerce, there are only really 2 companies that matter. That's Amazon and Shopify. Where Shopify is the decentralized distributed model and Amazon is the centralized one. But what do I think of Thrasio and the rest? I think that they grossly underestimate the operational complexity of trying to take disparate individual sellers and make, you know, valuable, cohesive, coherent sense out of them and trying to scale them. I think they grossly underestimate the complexity of so doing. And B, they're also overestimating the longevity of what an Amazon listing is worth. I mean, the truth is that Amazon is a perfect marketplace internally, you know, to the benefit of Amazon, but to the detriment of resellers. Because if you've managed to find a product category that works well, you will find endless copycats trying to outcompete with you. And, you know, I'm yet to see evidence that a successful Amazon listing will have longevity. And the economic argument of saying we can buy mom and pop resellers on Amazon for 1 or 2 times revenue, and then they're worth 10 times revenue just because we've bought them, that's just absolute snake oil. That doesn't mean anything at all. So I'm skeptical of the Thrasio model, whilst at the same time being in awe of the power of Amazon as a platform. When it comes to your ethical e-commerce platform for fashion, is that what the other one was? Sustainable fashion reseller?
No, I think it was, what are your insights on a social commerce platform for fashion?
Right, that's too general a question. I mean, coming back to my earlier comment at the beginning of this talk, which is every idea has been done 50,000 times, no matter how clever you think it is. It's all about the quality of execution. So in abstract, as a concept, sure, but actually that's not helpful because it's all about exactly how do you execute. It's going to make the difference between succeeding on this thing or not succeeding. So you need to figure out what is the magic ingredient of execution that's going to elevate you over the 2,000 others who've tried this so far. And it is out there because clearly it needs to work, even though nobody so far has made it work.
Thank you.
Marwan, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
It's a super simple question, but just curious to get your thoughts on like the importance of .com or like, you know, like domain purity early on. Yeah, it's just sort of something we're running through now.
So what do you mean exactly? What's your question?
Just like there's a lot of different domain TLDs, like, you know, .io, .ai, like
Okay, I got you.
I mean, there's a bunch, but
my view is that the hegemony of .com is waning, and your biggest challenge is not, you know, whether you're .io or .ai or .tv or .com or whatever else it is. Your biggest challenge is trademark. So the real challenge is not finding a domain. The real challenge is finding a domain that's not infringing on somebody else's trademark. That's the real problem.
interesting.
Because trust me, whatever name combination you've come up with, others have come up with other ones. And even though you might get the .com, whatever it is, you know, widget.com, great, I can get the domain. But if there is already a widget.io company out there and they're going to own the trademark on widget, and you can't just append the .com to it, widget, the trademark's already taken. So the real problem that you're going to find, I always, you know, whenever I create a new venture, I have 2 laptops open. One of them is looking for domain, but actually the one that I'm on much more is the US Trademark and Patent Office to try to figure out patents and trademarks, actually in this case, trademarks. And the problem is even if you find a US trademark that's available or free, it doesn't mean that it's free in Europe, or free in China, or free. So trademarks are the real problem, much bigger problem than domain availability.
That's a super interesting insight.
Great. Danielle, do you want to go ahead and unmute? And if you're working on a startup as well, feel free to include that in your introduction.
All right, I'm not working on a startup, but I did have this question. So I know that there is, you know, everyone knows this big trend of ESG, especially from like the regulatory pushes, and then also just in the landscape, there's more visibility overall. And so I want to hear your thoughts specifically on how, and this goes for any trend really, but how startups that aren't explicitly green, so like not battery startups, you know, not things that are explicitly related to the environmental aspect of it, can respond to or leverage existing movements such as this one.
I would answer it differently. So, you know, one of my great inspirations is the German architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, one of the fathers of modernism. You know, he gifted the world a whole string of beautiful buildings, including the Seagram building in New York and all manner of others. But most importantly, he also had a few wise words. And one of them was less is more, or in German, weniger ist mehr. And that was all about the aesthetic of modernism, which was about taking things away rather than adding things in order to let the essence and the core shine more brightly. And exactly the same is true for any venture that you're doing. I think you're much better off really understanding what is the blade with which you're able to cut through competition. The blade of your brand, the blade of your business, is your permission for competing in the marketplace. What is that blade? And be single-mindedly about that one blade rather than trying to cut in 10 different ways. If your venture fundamentally has nothing to do with ESG, don't try to piggyback ESG.
Great. That's a lot of food for thought. And Ernesto, are you good for time to close on Khan's question, or?
Sure, let's go for it. Fire away, Khan.
Okay, great.
Okay, let's do it. Thank you. I'll try to keep it quick. It is again regarding the problem of copycats sprouting up, trying to produce similar or perhaps even like the same product and maybe going to different markets. I'm just wondering, what do you think is the? Do you think a patent might provide a substantial or like considerable layer of protection against this problem, or is it not really that valuable? Because right now we are in the process of applying for a patent application for a agricultural robotic device that we're designing for indoors, and was just wondering whether you think that might help us somewhat deal with that copycat problem.
It's interesting. So to be very clear, unless you are a pharmaceutical company and you found a new compound that solves a particular illness or ailment, and the only way of dealing with that is that particular molecule, patents are useless. The only person who's going to be protected from a patent is a patent lawyer who you're forever going to be paying fees to. And here's the other point, right? So you're a young venture. Firstly, how on earth are you going to figure out whether somebody else is actually infringing your patent? How is it discoverable? And B, if somebody's infringing your patent, you and whose army is going to go after them? So the truth of the matter is, a lot of people try to find a moat that's somehow an enduring thing. And the moat often believed is an IP in the form of patents. But the truth is that no business, unless you're a pharmaceuticals business or biotech business, life sciences business, really gets a moat that is defensible for any period of time, other than your ability to be one step ahead of the competition forever. So a very common mistake that founders make, that you see in almost every business plan, is that they succeed and the world stays the same. And they just keep on succeeding, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more successful, and the world stays the same. Let me be very clear about it. If you've nailed it, if you've managed to crack the disruption and you're printing money, it's going to take 5 milliseconds before 2,000 VCs have funded 20,000 competitors who are going to completely ruin your unit economics by flooding the market with economically nonsensible ways of burning the cash because they're trying to get your slice of the pie. And then you're going to have the incumbents who are going to react too. Now, that's just life. If you're successful, you're going to attract massive amounts of competition. And your job is not to wish that it doesn't happen, because it will happen. Your job is then to anticipate that it will happen and forever be 1, 2, 3, or 5 steps ahead through focus on agile innovation, changing the rules of the game, forever being 1 step ahead of what it is that your competition is catching up with. That's actually the main thing you need to do. And the fallacy of patents is that they lead to the mentality of saying, okay, well, I've got my sandbox here and I'm safe here because I've got my moat around it. So I'm just going to play here now. And that never works. Like I say, patents are extremely, other than in certain categories like life sciences and biotech, extremely hard to enforce. You don't even have the means to enforce them if you wanted to. It's massively distracting to do so. And in so doing, you are keeping your eyes off the ball. The eye on the ball should be about how am I forever changing the game and upping the game rather than defending the position where I'm currently standing.
Thank you, Ernesto. I have a few things that would be perhaps reasonable to ask following up on that, but I know we're limited on time, but very valuable perspective. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, let's just about wrap up. Ernesto, this has been incredible, so interesting. Thank you so much for all of your time. Your advice and opinions have been perspective changing for me, and I'm sure a lot of the founders in our audience. And so, these are insights that will have impact on their trajectory and their strategy moving forward. So super, super helpful. Can't tell you how much it means to have your support. So thank you.
My pleasure, guys. Go and change the world and don't wait to be given permission to do so.
That's great. That's absolutely great. Thank you so much. So we'll close the session here. But thank you all.